Anybody wants to spend the next minute or two making a donation, you should be able to see the URL on the screen. Certainly be a worthwhile thing to do. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to thank all of you for attending our luncheon. Obviously, we used to do these things in person, but because of the pandemic, that's just not workable. But in actuality, this seems to work pretty well. I think we had a good luncheon the last month. So we'll keep going until such time as we can meet in person. Before we get started, I'd really like to recognize our chairperson, Carol Cure, for being selected by the Colorado State Democratic Party as chairperson of the year. So let's give Carol a visual round of applause. Thank you, Carol. I mentioned about doing a donation. My understanding is that the Plata Dems are doing okay on fundraising for right now, but some of our biggest fundraisers have had to be canceled due to the pandemic. So I would encourage everyone to donate to the party. And of course, you can do monthly donations where you set it up to a certain amount each month, and that's very useful because then we can see what we can anticipate. And obviously, this is a very important election, and we all know that it takes money to win elections. So before we get started, Ann Marquardt is going to make a few announcements, and I'm going to try to share my screen here. We'll see what happens. Go ahead, Ann. You'll need.
So far, it's not working.
Yeah, I know.
So, hi, everybody. So what I'm trying to talk about here, let me go ahead and pull up my information. What I'm trying to talk about here is what we are going to do to get out the vote this year. And as soon as Gwen is able to share it, that would be great. Oh, you are sharing now?
Yes, but I don't know that it's full screen. Maybe.
Are people seeing it? Okay, if not, it's fairly small, but we can still go over it. We are going to need volunteers, no question. We don't know exactly which campaigns are going to be really active in town. We don't know who is going to be renting office space. We aren't sure if it's going to be Mitz Bush or Hickenlooper or Biden. They're all still trying to figure out their way in the time of coronavirus as well. As a result, their real emphasis is going to be on phone banking. And I'm going to be sending out a survey to all volunteers this week, trying to find out who is willing to phone bank. It's a semi-automated program. Your phone is not needed, but you do need a computer with a good internet connection. So we're going to be contacting first new Democrats in La Plata County to ask them to get involved. We're going to be asking in-depth questions of people who have been inactive voters. There are a whole bunch of people out there who simply haven't voted in 2016 or 2018. We want to make sure that they know there's an election coming up and that they too can participate and be heard. And then of course, all of the campaigns are going to be soliciting volunteers to help them, and we're going to help try to coordinate that as well. We're going to be needing to do some data entry, updating van, and did I mention updating van? It's kind of an ongoing thing for us, but we could really use people's help who are comfortable with data entry and who like to work with either online programs or Google Drive, which we have as well. We're going to be doing very limited in-person headquarters staffing, a few hours a week, ramping up as we go forward, and a few hours of voter registration in a safe fashion, in a safe hands-off fashion. We're going to be collating and dropping or walking literature that includes all of the candidates' information as well as our entire Get Out the Vote flyer that we do. We're going to be doing that in September and early October. So we're going to need a huge push of a lot of volunteers. It's not a lot of time. We just identify the households, you drop literature on their doorstep, no person-to-person contact. And then, of course, we will also be doing texting, both with the different campaigns involved, as well as a bit of informational texting from our party. So there are lots of different ways to get involved. There are a couple of other things that aren't even on here. We need your help. We need to win this election, or we need to be thinking of different places we can all go live. Anyway, so we look forward to hearing from you. The survey is coming out this week. Thank you very much for that. Next slide. And, oh yeah, and so this, by the way, is a timeline of how we see needing those different things. You probably can't see it closely on your computer. What we really wanted to emphasize is that we actually do have a plan on how to move forward during COVID, and we will be doing so. Some of it ramps up this week. Some of it will be starting in mid to late July and August. We'll be really increasing staffing in the yellow at headquarters as we move forward, assuming it's safe, assuming we're not shut down. And then that kind of gives you periods of when phone banking is needed, when walking and literature drops are needed, etc. So it gives you an idea that we actually have thought through the entire season through to November 14. That's it. And the last thing I'd like to say, I know Matt is going to deal with it as well, but I just wanted to point out that our very cute candidates in their very cute social distancing costumes are going to be doing, or are prepared to do, a fundraiser, a real live in-person, we hope, fundraiser on July 31st, Friday, July 31st from 5 to 8 p.m. It's being done at a clubhouse up in Edgemont Highlands Ranch so that it's wide open. It's going to be very safe. One person only is handling drinks, for instance, and will be sanitized and in gloves. There's outside space for you to at least come and visit with candidates. And by the way, throw money at them. Yes, it's a fundraiser. They need your help. They're not able to do a lot of these. So please, let's all do this in a really super COVID-19 aware fashion. And if we possibly can, let's turn out to support them. Thank you. Hey, Matt.
Hey, how are you doing?
Good.
It's good to see you.
Before Matt gets started, just let me mention, if anybody has any other announcements to make, put something in the chat window and we'll recognize you at the end after Mike gets done with his presentation. So first, let's please welcome Matt Salka. He's limiting himself to 10 minutes. So if you have questions, please get them into the chat window right away. Matt?
Thank you, Gwen. Thank you, Ann and Carol, for giving me this opportunity to talk to you all. Hello, my name is Matt Salka, and I'm running for County Commissioner, District 3. Before I moved to La Plata County, I was a son of a military family. My grandfather served in the Navy during World War II, and my father served in the Navy for 25 years and was the director of utilities for the city of Durango. I attended Fort Lewis College for my information systems degree and started a small IT business. Several years later, I started a second business in pest control. I have deep roots here and first learned the importance of public service from my father and my grandfather. Serving others is my true passion. I began my political career as a trustee for the town of Bayfield. While 1 year into my term, I was asked to run for mayor of Bayfield. I served as mayor for one 4-year term. During those 4 years, I also served as a secretary of La Plata Economic Alliance Board and was a member of the Planning Commission for the town of Bayfield. From those experiences, I've learned what it takes to lead, govern effectively, and I'm confident I'll be an asset to the county. You know, I really enjoyed my job as mayor. This was a pivotal moment in my life. It's when I realized serving the public to make a difference in their lives is my passion. And this is what I intend to do for the rest of my life. I found myself working less at my two businesses and more for the town of Bayfield. As a nonpartisan mayor, I am known for my ability to look at all sides of an issue, to work compassionately with all, no matter what affiliation, to reach effective solutions. I will continue those efforts for La Plata County as commissioner. I am running because I want all residents to have access to great opportunities to support their families and thrive. And I will continue these efforts from the moment I'm elected as La Plata County Commissioner. During my time as mayor, we have achieved a lot for the town, including water sewer master plan, land use code, Mill Street revitalization, which helped start our Mill Street block parties. Next year, please attend them, they're great. But with those block parties, they helped attract 3 new restaurants on Mill Street. Park master plan, which will help lead the direction of our parks for our future. Recycling, bear-resistant trash containers, and a new water plant at no additional cost to the residents. Transparency. As a mayor, I felt it was crucial that the residents of Bayfield had access to our meetings. I helped create a Facebook page, new website with branding, and video record and stream all of our town board meetings now. I want to take that experience and bring it to the county commissioner's job so I can have a positive impact across La Plata County. These experiences have taught me how to make meaningful progress. I want to be La Plata County Commissioner so I can keep the county moving in a direction so all residents can enjoy the place that we call home. My key issues are, and not limited to, is affordable and attainable housing. As a renting resident of La Plata for 19 years, I know all too well how tight this housing market is. I believe there are ways to create affordable and attainable housing for first-time homebuyers, and I want to be a part of that. My experience with Bayfield's Planning Commission has helped me understand that there needs to be a better relationship between developers, landowners, and the government. Quality jobs. As a small business owner, I know personally how difficult it is to live in a county where the cost of living increases yearly. We need both larger employers with well-paying jobs, as well as infrastructure that serves our many entrepreneurs cost effectively. As a leader of the Mill Street Revitalization Committee in Bayfield and the La Plata Economic Alliance, I know the hard work that goes into attracting and retaining businesses. I'm committed to pursuing more opportunities for our community and ensuring that future growth is equitable and benefits both new and longtime residents in our rural areas and as in the towns and the city. Balanced budget. As an elected official, I am committed to govern responsibly with a balanced budget. It comes from my experience as a small business owner and is a big part of my approach as a public servant. As a mayor of Bayfield and trustee, I have kept a balanced budget over my 6-year tenure. As county commissioner, you can count on me to govern within our means and to keep our expenses and revenue balanced. Infrastructure improvements. Infrastructure is key to smart growth. Our county roads and bridges need to stay maintained. As mayor, I help lead Bayfield's water plant expansion at no additional cost to town residents. Recently, I helped secure a $3 million water line replacement project, as well as no additional cost to residents. We also tackled a large bridge replacement project, and as county commissioner, you can count on me to seek grants, strategic partnerships, and always look out for La Plata's best interests when it comes to infrastructure. What's best for La Plata County? Let's work together as a team. This is your county, and I want to hear your voice. It's very important that you know this election, you can vote for both District 2 and 3. You're allowed 2 votes in this county commissioner election, so please use them both. I want to express my gratitude to the club and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with the citizens of La Plata County. As Ann Marquardt was talking about with our fundraiser on July 31st, please come out to meet State Representative and candidate Barbara McLaughlin and County Commissioner candidate Marsha Porter Norton for District 2 and myself, Matt Salka, District 3. We're having a fun and safe social distancing fundraiser. Music by local guitarist Pete Giuliani. It's open house, so please stop by anytime between 5 and 8. We will also have simple appetizers in a COVID-19 safe manner. No buffet, drinks served by one person. Guests can be inside and on the deck and outside too. This is a fundraiser for all 3 candidates, so bring your mask, yourself, and your checkbook. Dress in your favorite social distancing costume or fun summer attire. This event is at Edgemont Highlands Community Lodge at 40 Red Canyon Trail. Please tell your friends. Again, my name is Matt Salka and I'm running for County Commissioner. My website is mattsalka.com. I'm definitely needing help with more donations. If you would like to volunteer for my campaign, please reach out to me at my website, or my email address is matt@mattsalka.com. This is a people-powered campaign. I need your help to get my name out there and get elected as County Commissioner District 3. So again, thank you to the club and thank you to all the residents of La Plata County for coming to this meeting. And I'm looking forward to talking and working for you all here soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Kathy, I think we had at least one question that was posted in the chat window.
Please.
You'll have to unmute yourself, Kathy.
Okay, I got it. Matt,
Yes.
There was one question about your stand on the county face mask order. What your position is on that?
The face mask order is definitely important. I think it is crucial that we should have a face mask order. You know, I also feel that it might be to the point where we need to even up it even more and have rules and laws and regulations to ticket people without wearing a face mask. It was very unfortunate for the town of Bayfield, since this is where my beginning of my political career happened, was in Bayfield. I was pretty upset about that there was not a face mask order in for the town of Bayfield. I applaud the city of Durango for starting this one set up here in La Plata County for a face mask order. Unfortunately, though, when I'm traveling through Durango for work, as well as just traveling through the city, you still see it. People are still not wearing their masks. So I think it is crucial that La Plata County, you know, there's other counties that are doing it. There are other counties that are not having a face mask order, but I feel it's crucial that we should have an order in La Plata County to help protect the citizens, the residents of La Plata County. And I feel that it's crucial that we should go up to the next step and have a order for wearing face masks in public spaces.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
The questioner also mentioned that she needs gopher mitigation.
Oh yeah, I didn't know if I should ask that or not.
Oh, you can. Yeah, so I have a pest control business, and yeah, please reach out to me. I will. I'll help you out here.
There was also a message from Barbara McLaughlin. Barbara, if you can stay for the whole meeting, you might make that announcement at the end. If you can't, then please go ahead and unmute and you can make that statement now.
No, I'm happy to do this at the end. Let's let the speaker speak. I'm happy to have them first.
Okay,
Thanks.
Barbara.
Thanks, Barbara.
Thanks, Matt.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
So I'm going to talk just a little bit about Mike Todt, and I'm going to go ahead and make him the host here so that he can get his screen share going. But Mike and his wife, Tammy Hoyer, moved to Durango in 2013. Currently, he volunteers at the Center for Southwest Studies doing archival work, and he's on the Boulevard Neighborhood Association. Mike is very involved working with food insecurity and the homeless as a board member of Manna Soup Kitchen, NINA Steering Executive Committee, that's Neighbors in Need Alliance, and a member of the City Council Internal Working Group that developed the Athena Report on the Homeless. His passion is traveling, although like a lot of us right now, he can't do much of that. Camping and road biking, and he mentioned that he loves the Iron Horse. His prior positions have included history professor at West Virginia University, licensed clinical psychologist and executive coach, and prior education included a PhD in modern U.S. history from West Virginia University and PhD and MA in organizational psychology from the University of Chicago. So that's quite a resume, Mike. And we'd like to welcome Mike. I think his presentation is going to be very interesting. At this point, Mike, you're not full screen.
I am now. Okay. Am I full screen?
Now you are.
All right. So we ready? I guess.
Yes, we're ready. Go for it.
Okay, so thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm looking forward to sharing this information. And I did this at Fort Lewis College probably about 6 months to a year ago, but clearly, as I talked to Carol, this issue is not going to go away anytime soon. And I found some new information, I think, about what's currently going on. So here's how I want to start. I love this little thing, learned about it a long time ago. it's hard walking on this stuff, dealing with divisiveness. Yes, we have met the enemy, and the enemy is us. So as we go through this presentation, I think that should become more clear in terms of who is the enemy and what are we going to do about it. So I thought we'd start with this one. This is a great quote from Washington's farewell address. Essentially, what it says is, it's really the common and continual mischiefs of the spirit of party are sufficient to make it the interest and duty of a wise people to discourage and restrain it. Essentially, he saw way back when is having political parties will really be the source of divisiveness and polarization. Again, it agitates the community, animosity, etc. So Washington saw much. So what are we going to talk about? One is I'm going to take you through in terms of how divided are we as a nation. If we are divided, how are we divided, and what's the severity of the divisiveness? Second, is our divisiveness and polarization really new, or is this a part of our nation's fabric? Because I think that makes a difference in terms of what's the solution. Then I'm going to talk a bit about what happened historically since the end of World War II and what has led to this level of divisiveness and polarization. And I guess history is really important because while history doesn't predict the present is based in the past in some ways. So finally, how are we as individuals, how do we contribute to this divisiveness? And finally, what can be done, or are we doomed as a nation? I think there's hope. So divisiveness, again, a couple definitions, is essentially creating disunity or dissension to cause disagreement or hostility. That's different from polarization, so I'm going to be talking about both. And polarization is division into two sharply contrasting groups or sets of opinions or beliefs, concentration about opposing extremes. So we're both have elements that divide us, and we are clearly at this point a very polarized country. So what are the current national issues where we see divisiveness? And you can see a long list. Currently, race and ethnicity are sort of at the forefront. Homelessness, role of government, civil and voting rights, gender, policing, climate change, and many, many, many others. Lots of sort of issues. Then I looked at what local issues divide us, even in La Plata County and the city of Durango. New tax proposals and needs, city and county, the homeless, growth and development, neighborhoods, ADUs, affordable housing, trust in government, income gap, neighborhoods, racism, and now, as Matt had talked about in terms of the question posed to him, the COVID pandemic and the use of masks. You can see that in the Durango Herald. So again, we're pretty polarized on some of those issues. So how divided and polarized are we? What I've come up with is a set of some data, and I largely took this from the Pew Charitable Trust because they do very sort of nonpartisan studies. They've been doing them for a long period of time, and I think if you want more information, I think you would find it extremely informative. And I'm going to go through these fairly quickly because I think you're going to see immediately sort of the what are we polarized and divided about, and what's sort of the nature of that. This is one of my favorite graphs. So you can see in 1994, when we look at sort of they base this on sort of looking at ideology. In 1994, Democrats and Republicans were pretty close together on many, many issues. In 2004, again, they were pretty close. But if we look at 2017, in terms of ideology, we are really, really much more divided. And I can remember growing up, and I remember studying history, there used to be something called the moderate Democrat and the moderate Republican. And now we tend to become much more sort of extreme in some of those views. So again, our parties have gotten more ideologically divided over the past 20 years. And I suspect if we did that today, that gap would be wider. When we look at who is more Republican, it tends to be more Democrat, you can see the Republicans, white evangelicals, white non-college men, rural Southerners, religious services, Gen X men, and then Democrat advantage, white college and women, millennial women, Hispanic, Catholic, religious, unaffiliated, urban, Northeastern, and Black women. But very clearly, there is a very significant divide in terms of who becomes Democrat and who becomes Republican. This is also, I think, very informative in terms of how people rate themselves. And again, people who have more education, who tend to be younger and tend to be women, tend to see themselves as more liberal than people who are older, people who have less education, and men who tend to be more conservative. Again, not perfect, but again, clearly some trends. This one I find is, we're going to talk a little bit more about this in the end, but this is very important. This is sort of the percent of people when talking about politics with people they disagree with, they usually find they have less in common politically than they thought. And both Republicans and Democrats, and Republicans leaning Republican, Democrats leaning Democrats, that includes independents, essentially we don't believe that we have much in common with the other side. And when we look at some of the data, that's probably true. This one is particularly, I find, interesting and also difficult sometimes to deal with. It essentially says the more education you have, the more intolerant you are toward other parties and other people. You have more essentially disrespect for dissimilar people. So the more college education we have, the more education we have, the more polarized we are in our political views. The less education we have, the more we tend toward the middle. This again is share of the independents, and over the years, over a period of time, we have seen the number of independents growing, but when we look at the bottom graph, we actually see more people trending toward Democrat or lean Democrat than lean Republican. This I thought was interesting. It's not so much about the Democrats, it's really about the Republicans, but even among the Republicans, this graph is really showing how younger and older Republicans differ on foreign policy, immigration, etc. And again, if you look at the top, we see some real gaps among the Republicans. Good diplomacy is the best way to ensure peace. Again, the younger ones would agree with that. The older Republicans believe it's really not diplomacy, it would probably be arms. And then you can kind of see where Democrats are at. So there's some more similarity with younger Republicans and Democrats and leading Democrats than with the older Republicans. And again, that goes all the way down. Where the Republicans, young and old, agree, government should provide more assistance. They don't agree with that at all. White people benefit a great deal and a fair amount from advantages. They don't think that's true either, and we'll see that in another graph. So again, even among Republicans, there are differences. This one is about Democrats, Republicans, and white Democrats and Black Republicans. So if you see the first slide or first question, it says it's not necessary to believe in God in order to have good values. Black Republicans don't believe that's true. They believe it's very necessary to believe in God, whereas white Democrats and leaning Democrat, 89% believe that's not necessary. So there's a gap between Black Democrats, leaning Democrats, and white Democrats. And Republicans are also very close now to the Black Democrats. Legalizing same-sex marriage, again, big difference between Black Democrats and white Democrats. Environmental control a little closer. And when we get down to the bottom, we see between Black and white Democrats, gun laws should be more strict. Again, there is some disagreement. So even within the Democrats, between Black Democrats and white Democrats, there's some division, some difference in terms of opinion. This is something in terms of looking over time, sort of how the gap between Republicans and the Democrats across all kinds of domains has changed. Government regulation of business usually does more harm than good. Democrats, 30% agree with that, 63% no. But back in 1994, again, much more agreement. Most corporations make a fair and reasonable profit. Democrats over time say that's not true, and Republicans again are pretty much the same. So again, we look over time, the gaps have widened in most cases. This again is where partisan differences over serious problems facing the United States. Racial and ethnic minorities are treated by the criminal justice system. Republicans say, no, that's not a problem. Democrats say that is a problem. So again, if you look through that, racism, Republicans not a problem, Democrats pretty much problem 63%. Illegal immigration, Democrats, that's not much of a problem. Republicans, it's a huge problem. So again, wide gaps between Republicans and Democrats. This again is just how we see the government. Assuring access to health care up there. October 1915, 74% thought the government was doing a good job, but given what the Trump administration has done to the ACA, now only 29% say that's true. And if we look at Republicans, more Republicans think the government is doing a good job with that. Managing the U.S. immigration system, actually, there's a little bit of similarity. Maintaining infrastructure again, but in many cases, there's not a strong belief that Republicans, that the government is doing a good job in many areas. But again, wide differences of opinion. This one I think is particularly telling. This is the percent of people who very strongly or somewhat strongly agree in terms of trust in government. And as of sort of 2019, only 17% of Americans, this is both Republicans, Democrats, whites, blacks, it's a stratified sample, had a strong or somewhat strong trust in government. But if you go back to Johnson, this is when we had the highest level of trust in government. And I suspect it began falling with the Vietnam War and what Johnson did regarding the lying about the Vietnam War. But you can see a continual decline. And then again, we see it going up slightly with George W. Bush. But that's also around the time of 9/11. This one I find particularly interesting. This is sort of Americans having a great deal of confidence. And if you look starting from the upper left, we really have a great deal of confidence in medical scientists, the military, K through 12 principals, religious leaders, journalists, much less so, business leaders, and elected officials we have the least trust in, the least confidence in terms of acting in the best interest of the public. And again, that has really not changed much in the last 4 years. So we don't trust government and we don't have confidence in our elected leaders. This again is maybe another cause of sort of divisiveness and polarization. If we look at what is the gap in wealth between whites and blacks, and you can see the average wealth of whites, almost $142,000. Blacks, their level of wealth is at $11,000. If we look at Hispanics only do slightly better, and their total wealth is on average only about $13,700. So when we talk about the inequality in this country regarding wealth, it's pretty huge. These are generational differences in terms of job approval for Obama and Trump. And again, Obama had much greater job approval, but I found what was also very interesting is the millennials, strong approval for Obama, and their approval for Trump is way down. Same thing for Generation X. Essentially, they've all come down for Trump. Now, how do we see Trump and the media? Who's more divisive? Well, the Democrats see Trump as more divisive. The independents see the media as more divisive. And the Republicans see the media as more divisive. But overall, the national media is viewed as much more divisive than Trump is by all voters. This again is kind of interesting. So it looks at who the Democrats and people that lean Democrat, what news source do they trust? And for Republicans and leaning Republican, what news source do they trust? And again, not surprising in terms of who liberals trust: CNN, New York Times, PBS, NPR, NBC News. We look at the conservatives; they trust Fox News, Hannity, Limbaugh, and I found this interesting. ABC News and CBS. Again, they find them most trustworthy. Then they ask, who do you distrust? And again, liberals, Fox News, Limbaugh, Breitbart, Hannity, New York Post. And conservatives, CNN, MSNBC, New York Times, NBC, and then CBS again. So again, there's real differences in terms of what sources of the media we use to get our news. Whom do we trust and whom do we not trust? Which has implications for moving forward with sort of decreasing divisiveness. Again, sharp divide in terms of our view of the media. And if you look over to the left, media criticism of political leaders keeps them from doing things they shouldn't. Again, Democrats believe this is very important in terms of media criticism, and Republicans not so much. Do news organizations tend to favor one side? Republicans, yes, 86% say yes, 52% of Democrats say no. Information from national news organizations is very trustworthy. Essentially, both groups are saying not so much. Not so much. National news does a good job keeping them informed. And again, the media, as I will talk further, is really one of the sort of major sources of divisiveness in this country and potentially a source of solution. Okay, this is now on the COVID crisis, and again, probably shouldn't surprise us. Again, Republicans far more comfortable than Democrats going to salons, restaurants, indoor events, parties. And again, the states that tended to have opened early in this crisis tended to have been run by Republican administrations. Again, it's just based on differing beliefs about the COVID crisis, etc. And again, going to a hair salon, Democrats not so comfortable. Republicans, they would feel much more comfortable. Attending a crowded party, Republicans, 31% say that's okay, Democrats not so much. So again, broad differences in how Democrats and Republicans would handle issues around COVID. This is again looks at partisan gaps in terms of concerns about the pandemic. And again, what we see is not only Democrats and Republicans will get COVID and require hospitalization. Democrats much more concerned, but that is growing. And Republicans, they were less concerned now than they were prior and might knowingly, unknowingly spread the virus. Democrats are much more concerned about spreading the virus, Republicans less so. But look at the gap in terms of Hispanics, blacks, and whites. Hispanics and blacks are much more concerned about getting COVID-19 than whites. And if you look at the data says they got more COVID cases and they're suffering higher levels of mortality. And again, that's based on sort of health inequities. But it's also based on the fact that Hispanics and blacks tended to work. I think they found in New York City, in some parts of New York City, 50 to 60% of people of color had the antibodies for the COVID, which meant they were working through this pandemic. And again, the last slide, again, Hispanics and blacks much more concerned about spreading COVID than whites. Experience with the police, again, huge gaps in many ways between whites, blacks, Asians, and Hispanics. And again, people acted like they were suspicious of them. Whites, you know, rarely do we think that people are suspicious of us, but in terms of being a black, absolutely. As one of my African-American friends once told me that when he goes into Walmart, he really wants to watch his back because he's really sort of concerned and pretty sure that people are following him. Been subject to slurs or jokes, white people not so much, blacks certainly, fear for their personal safety. And you can see the gaps between whites, blacks, Asians, and Hispanics. White and black views about police treatment. Again, in terms of whites believe that protecting people from crime, police do a really pretty good job of that. Blacks, they don't believe that so much. Using the right amount of force in each situation. Whites, they think, you know, police do a pretty good job of that. Blacks, not so much. But again, probably the people where the police are using the force on tend to be at least proportionately more on blacks and whites. Treating racial and ethnic groups equally, whites believe that police are doing a pretty good job of that, blacks not so much. So again, huge difference between whites and blacks. Our race relations in the United States are generally bad. Blacks, 71% say yes. Has Trump made race relations worse? Blacks, 73% yes. So again, large gaps between how blacks and whites see race relations in this country. And I think the last one again, not at all likely that the black people will eventually have equal rights. Half the blacks believe they will not have equal rights in this country. Views on how blacks are treated, again, in dealing with the police. This is, in general, blacks are treated less fairly than whites in each one of the following situations: dealing with the police, more so than whites, criminal justice system, hiring, pay. In all of those categories, blacks believe that they're just not treated as fairly as whites. And this is what, when we talk about it, this is what we call institutional racism, not individual racism, but institutional racism. So this is how Republicans and Democrats sort of view their views on the country's racial progress. And again, I think overall what the slide says is Democrats and those leaning Democrats think that blacks have really not gotten a fair shake, whereas Republicans tend to think that they've gotten a fairly good shake, and that, you know, race relations are improving. The advantages of being white, again, white people don't really think, in some cases, there's a real advantage to being white, whereas blacks and Hispanics think there is an advantage to being white. And again, that comes with this concept of white privilege. Here we go with Trump and race relations. This is probably not going to surprise anybody. All adults, well, at least 48% of all adults believe that Trump has made race relations worse. And when we look at whites, only 42% of whites, but blacks, Hispanics, and Asians tend to believe that Trump has done a really poor job of race relations. And clearly Democrats by 80% and think that Trump has done a very poor job of race relations. So again, if you look at, and here's a couple other things. So in 1967, a Supreme Court case, Loving versus Virginia, decreed laws banning interracial marriages was illegal. That was a very important case. But today, only 16% of married couples are biracial. So again, it says something in terms of whether people have really come together on a more physical, more intimate basis. In 1960, 5% of Democrats and Republicans were displeased that their son or daughter married a person of the other party. Today, it's up to 50% of Republicans and 30% of Democrats. It was real similar when I was growing up in terms of marrying somebody of the same religion. So here we have marrying somebody of the same or a different party. 1960, 33% of Democrats thought members of their party were intelligent, and only 27% thought the other party was intelligent. Today, Democrats, 62% think that their party is intelligent, but only 14% of the Republicans are intelligent. So now we have a difference in terms of who we see as intelligent. And again, both liberals and conservatives by 90% obtain sources that support their own points of view. And again, we'll talk about that when we get to confirmation bias. At this point, any questions? No questions?
I haven't seen anything in the chat.
Okay, good. Okay. All right. So that's the data. And again, to summarize the data, you can go to the Pew Research Foundation, and they have done these kinds of studies for the past 20 or 30 years. You can find studies on literally any subject that you want. But as I went through it for the past 2 to 3 years, it all came out the same. The divide between Republicans and Democrats is growing. The divide between whites and blacks is growing or the same. And other people of color. Do we trust the government? No. And I suspect that at this point is going to continue for a while.
Mike, there was one. I'm sorry.
Okay. Go ahead.
Mike, somebody asked if it would be possible to get a hold of these slides.
Sure.
How would that be possible?
Can you put them on your website? The slide presentation?
Gwen?
Yeah, I'm sure we can do
Yeah,
that.
that's a good one. If not, if I get the emails for people, I'd be happy to send them.
Why don't, this is Ann, why don't people let Gwyn at La Plata Dems or me, communications at La Plata Dems know, and we'll send them out to you. We'll try to put them on the website, but I don't know how that would work, so I don't want to promise it.
Yeah, okay. I will send them to you two, and then you two can figure that out. So let me start with this quote, because you've all heard it. Those who cannot learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Those who do not remember their past are condemned to repeat their mistakes. Those who do not read history are doomed to repeat it. That's George Santa Anna. It's been said many times and in many ways. I'm a historian. Well, I'm a lots of things, but one of the things I did do was to study U.S. history, modern U.S. history, largely around healthcare reform. And one of the things I know is that history really forms the basis of the present and the future. It is not a perfect predictor of the present and the future, but when I go through this presentation, where we've come from the 1950s on, has everything to do with where we are today. So changing where we are today, again, has a very strong basis and precedent in the past, which makes it difficult, but not impossible. But again, somebody asked the question, so is this all new? And I would say, no, this is not new. It's really a part of our DNA to be in conflict. And if we go back, these are just a few examples of the conflict you can find in American history. French and Indian War, how we treated religious groups, free American Revolution, the American Revolution going on, the early days of the Republic, Jackson and Pierce eras. We had slave states, there's non-slave Mexican-American War, Indian removal. Then we had post-Reconstruction, Western movement. All of these are really sort of indicative of the level of conflict that we've had. And in some cases, that conflict has been far more severe than what we had now. I can remember during the Great Depression, at least the history of the Great Depression, there were food and rent riots in these cities with 50 to 100,000 people marching through the streets. And they were violent in some cases. And we had the race riots in the 1940s to present, and then we had the 60s and beyond. So essentially, divisiveness and polarization is a part of our history. It's kind of who we are. It's sort of the basis upon how we started as a nation. So again, it's not necessarily an easy thing to change. Well, let me start with World War II, and I'm going to go through this so you kind of get a sense. This is post-World War II in the Cold War era. One of the things that created cohesiveness in our country was communism. Communism became our enemy, and essentially around our hate of communism, fear of communism, we created a level of cohesiveness. At that point, it was a conservative wasteland. Essentially, the Democrats or the liberals and the progressives were really much in control, although there was a conservative revival in the South, the Sun Belt, and Orange County, California, which is really considered to be the home of conservatism. There was something called the liberal consensus from 45 to the 60s. Again, anti-communist, the welfare state, we're going to take care of people, the nuclear family, but it was a status quo with race. We're not going to do anything essentially to change race. Truman did cause the armed forces to be integrated, but that was, in terms of real integration, pretty limited. And economic prosperity increased during this period for many, not people of color, but for whites as a result of the post-war economy and growth of unions. So again, during the probably late 50s and 1960s, it was the period where income equality was the least in our country. Then we get to the 60s. College enrollments boomed with middle-class kids, civil rights movements, blacks, Hispanics, Native Americans, the Vietnam War, incredibly divisive. It was a generational divide, but we also learned something about the silent majority. There was a lot of people early in the Vietnam War that supported the Vietnam War, but that would change as we moved into the 70s and more of the sort of older generation would join some of those demonstrations. A lot of civil unrest in cities and on reservations, especially, for example, when Martin Luther King was assassinated. Trust in government is high. This was at its highest peak under Johnson, although it's going to begin to decline again as a result of the Vietnam War and what Johnson was talking about. And again, this is the era of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. This is my era. It was fun. In 1968 election, again, there was a new Republican upsurge. So again, this is where Republicans begin to take control. And lastly, the economic gap between the rich and the poor was at its lowest in history. Poverty levels at this point began to diminish as a result of Social Security and the war on poverty. So in some cases, 60s, a lot of turbulence, but on the other hand, things were changing in terms of economic equality, at least for a while. 1970, it's going to grow. And again, Nixon now creates the Republican South. This was formerly Democrats, but they were Dixiecrats. And we had Watergate, which again was incredibly divisive and would cause our trust in government to decline considerably. The liberal consensus unravels while the conservatives and the religious right now begin to unite, and this will lead to the election of Reagan in the 1980s. We also have identity politics, cultural conflict. I'm sure many of you remember this. Women, gays, Native Americans, Hispanics, Roe v. Wade, ERA, Phyllis Schlafly. I mean, all of that was just about identity politics, etc. We also had economic chaos and stagnation. This is where we had the OPEC embargo. We had long gas lines, rampant inflation. And I can remember when I was the administrator of a hospital, and one of the things that our patients could get, I wasn't sure how they could get it, they could get 14% interest on a savings account. And I didn't quite understand that. And I can also remember my first mortgage in 1978, 14.5%. So again, it was economic chaos. Trust in government is declining, major congressional and party rule changes. And also a scholar from the University of Chicago was trying to look at this whole notion of where the white nationalists came from. And the white nationalist organizations were really beginning to get their start with returning Vietnam War vets. And finally, desegregation and housing riots in the northern cities. So again, lots of things going on in the 70s. But then we have the Reagan Revolution. And again, the end of the Cold War by the end of Reagan's time in 1989. And here's a significant event. This is when cable TV begins. CNN is the first cable news outlet. And after this period of time, more and more news outlets are going to begin broadcasting. And again, that's going to be a source of problems. The conservative ascendancy is now complete. Reagan with the evangelicals, and the Democrats now begin to move toward the center. They can't be as far out as liberal and progressive. Trust in government again declines further. We have Iran-Contra, the savings and loan scandal. Again, more economic instability. We have 2 recessions during this period, and the income gap widens. AIDS epidemic, drug wars, partisan gap. And again, I think if you're a Democrat, you'll remember Lee Atwater. He created new forms of negative campaigning that continue to this day. And again, the beginning of the end of affirmative action. In the 1990s, the internet is now firmly a part of our lives, for better or for worse. The partisan gap again widens, and again, we can see the contract with America, with Newt Gingrich. We see more gerrymandering of congressional districts, and the media is now creating more dissension. Trust in government again continues in its decline. We have Nannygate, we have Whitewater under Clinton, Travelgate, Waco, Texas, the Clinton sex scandals, terrorism. But again, all of that, even terrorism, is do we trust the government? Do we have confidence in the government to protect us? And when they came to our soils in terms of not the Twin Tower, no, sorry, in Oklahoma, it really damaged. Economic disparity is maintained. We have Rodney King, and we have media ghettos and partisan media. When we get to the 2000 to present, the conflict is now only, to me, intensifying. We have now the war on terrorism. We have much more gerrymandering going on. I think, 90% of US representatives and senators tend to get reelected. We have now the decline of voting rights with more strict voter ID laws, more corporate influence in elections, Citizens United. We had the financial meltdown in 2008. And now we have the rise of the ultra-liberals and the ultra-conservatives. So again, that gap is growing. White nationalists more visible in the rise of the alt-right. And again, the first black president. While many of us lauded that, there were many people quite disturbed by that. Then we have Trump and nationalism, make America great. Our levels of suicide, addiction, stress, and anxiety are now going up, especially during this pandemic. We have the Occupy Wall Street movement, Black Lives Matter, Me Too, again, all about divisiveness and polarization, demonstrations, the recent ones, and the decline of print media and the role of social media. Print media has declined in terms of the number of journalists. I think we've gone from 57,000 down to 35,000. You can see the Durango Herald, again, is shrinking. So I hope we don't lose it. It plays a very important role. And now social media has become a major source of information. And finally, the COVID epidemic, mass social distancing, and again, lots of conflict around that. So let me just sort of summarize sort of the sources of conflict in our society. One is increasing secularization. There are actually fewer people going to church, there are fewer Christians, and our trust in religion has declined, not only in this country, but also in Europe. We have this increasing political polarization, what we call political sorting. Essentially, liberals and progressives like to spend time with liberals and progressives, and conservatives want to spend time with conservatives. And we also see that in terms of where people live. Liberals and progressives like to live with people who are similar to them, as do conservatives. So that's what we call political sorting. So again, if we want, and again, that may be in part where we'll find a solution. Increasing economic disparity in wages. It exists between men and women, between people of color and whites, and also poverty rates. Poverty rates are now beginning to increase largely because of the COVID epidemic. Increasing cultural diversity and conflict. The passing of the greatest generation. These were the people born sort of in the 1920s and the 1930s, and they had different values, and their values were more around sacrifice, civic responsibility. When we talk to the boomers in Generation X and Y and millennials, they don't hold those same kinds of values. Those are just different values. Doesn't make those values wrong, it's just different. We have geographical sorting, and again, people live with their like kind, both political, ethnic, and racial. Increased segregated housing. Our housing is no more integrated now than it was in the 1960s, and our schools are no more integrated now than the 1960s overall. Now, in some places that may be true, but when we look at large cities, again, the way you tend to get more integrated schools is to have more integrated housing, and that's generally not the case. And increasingly, we see a partisan media, the decline of ethical journalism, and media ghettos. In some places, local areas don't have newspapers. They have to rely on the internet or national news, and national news tends to be biased one way or the other. And finally, we have seen since the Johnson era, a significant decline in trust in government. And lastly, we've seen rule changes in Congress, voting, and political donations. So that's sort of summarizing all of the sources of where we've come from since the 1950s and today. Let me just finish this and we'll go to questions. So some would say it's all about economics. And economics is linked to political and cultural polarization. So we have maybe two kinds of major economies in this country now. One is the industrial economy. Midwestern cities has declined for the past 50 years. And so the American dream is lost for many. If we look at why Trump got elected, he got elected, well, one of the reasons is you look at Pennsylvania, you look at Michigan, Wisconsin, and Ohio, and those were industrial economic states. And again, many people have lost their jobs. The new knowledge economy is really based on the East and the West Coast, and again, metropolitan areas and suburbs, and that's risen alongside the decline of the industrial economy. So one is going up, one's coming down. But if you look, the industrial economy, again, Democrat to conservative, they've changed. It's about family, religion, flag, nation, the resentment toward immigrants, minorities, elites, part of the religious right. And this is the group that largely probably was a major factor in the election of Trump. The knowledge economy is different. Broad view of family, pride in university, professionals, mobile, internet, etc. So again, we have differences if we think it's about economics. This, I think, is probably one of the best books I have ever read because I was trying to understand why is it that people voted for Trump? Because again, it's really important to understand where the other side is coming from. So this woman, Arlie Hochschild, she is an anthropologist, a sociologist from, I think, the University of California, spent 5 years in the bayous of Louisiana. And she spent those 5 years talking and living with people who lived in the bayou. And these folks were largely Republican, and they were very pro-Trump. And what she wanted to discover was, what was the deep story? What were their feelings? not about facts or judgment, but why did people support Trump? And what was so curious, some of the findings she found, is that these people supported Trump, and they, even though many of them were dying of major cancers and other diseases as a result of all of the pollution, and where the EPA could have been their savior, they had great distrust in the EPA and the government, and great trust in Trump, who has essentially dismantled the EPA. So again, if we see this deep story, it allows any one of us to see the subjective prism on how others see the world, which is important in dealing with divisiveness and polarization. It's a way to understand the politics of the other. So this is essentially what she found. These folks and these Trump people, and this would probably be true to me of people in Pennsylvania, people in Ohio, and this would have been true of my family, and they were all auto plant workers in Detroit. They're all waiting in line to achieve the American dream. It's on the other side of the hill, but over time, they can't see it anymore. You know, that we can all make it to the top. We can all have this wonderful life. They don't see it anymore. They see a bunch of people cutting in line. Blacks, Hispanics, some cases women, liberals. And again, the government's letting them in. They want to know, how did Obama rise so high? He's a black guy. How could he have gotten as high as president of the land? And again, it's important to understand why they see that as important. They feel betrayed. They no longer feel that the government's going to help them. They find it hard to progress economically. And again, they're confined to this very small economic group. And again, if you think of hard to progress economically, think of the people in Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Michigan. People who, again, if you get a job now in, automobile plants, you might earn $10 to $15 an hour. Very different than what my relatives would have earned when they worked in the 1970s, 1980s with the UAW. They don't like liberals because they think liberals think they're rednecks, racist, they're ignorant, just white Bible thumpers. Again, cat calls, as we talk about, dog whistles, they talk about cat calls. They feel like they are strangers in their own land. They don't recognize yourself as others see you. So they don't see themselves as we see them as liberals. Race and gender, again, very, very important behind this deep story. And again, class conflict and government trust are critical elements. So again, if you want to understand sort of the point of view of those people who believe in Trump, who voted for Trump, and who may vote for Trump again, and the conservatives in many of these southern states, this is a great book to read. And when she took this data back to them and said, this is how I'm going to portray you, they said to a T, you got it, you figured it out. Colin Woodward had a sort of a different point of view, which is that we're really not one nation at all. We're really 11 different nations. And again, we've got the West Coast, the East Coast, the Midwest, the South, the Deep South, etc. And again, it's not just a question of nations, it's a question of values. In each one of these sort of nations that he talks about, there are very different values that guide us. And let me sort of finish here and then we can go to questions. The media. The media is a major perpetrator of our divisiveness and polarization. One, the increase in TV and radio outlets. Social media essentially is give people what they want. This is Zuckerberg, and also the role of algorithms. Essentially, when you start going on social media like Google News, you use Facebook, they don't track you specifically as an individual. They're tracking your computer. They know what you're looking at, and they will give you more of what you're looking at. If my wife and we did this experiment a few weeks ago. She went to Google News, I went to Google News. We pulled up the headlines, and we got very different headlines. I said, well, that's because Google has figured out what I like to look at, and it's figured out what she likes to look at, etc. And again, with Facebook, they kind of know. And again, questionable values. I mean, we're seeing a big sort of to-do now with Facebook in terms of what will they do about some of these false ads that are going on. We've seen a little progress with Twitter. Social media encourages brevity, directness, which leads to a decline in civil discourse. That's at least what the research says. When we repeat the same material, which is what these sort of social media things do, it tends to increase the importance of the material. The more often you see it, the more important it is. and increases the frenzy of the emotions that people might have. We see a decline in journalistic standards regarding facts versus non-facts, news versus opinion, infomercials, journalism versus entertainment. And I'll share with you an example I had with the Durango Herald. There was an editorial, and in that editorial, it said that President Eisenhower was the first president to support national health insurance and universal health care. And I thought, that's strange, because all of my research and I taught courses on health reform said Eisenhower was a conservative and didn't believe in that at all. So I wrote the editor of the column and I said, that's just not true. And he said, well, look, you know, I was just trying to make a point. And I know it wasn't true, but I was just trying to make a point. And at that point I said, you don't make a point with historical facts, but I lost the argument. So, but again, even the Durango Herald, now I suspect when I read an editorial, is it all fact or is there some fiction in here? And again, journalism versus entertainment. Journalism, social media is the pursuit of quantity and ratings. And again, one of the things that they can do with software now is they can, if you're pulling up CNN, if a particular headline and an advertisement is not sort of catching on, they can change the headline just to a degree so that more people will see it. And again, there's more advertising dollars. Again, finally, print media, which produces depth, which we see in newspapers, is now declining, and you can see the decline in journalists. So any questions at this point about sort of historically how we got to this point?
Kathy, we're seeing a lot of comments as well as questions in the chat window,
right.
But Kathy, you might see if there's a couple of questions that have been asked that maybe Mike can answer. Kathy, are you muted?
I think so.
So people want to borrow different books. I'm just kind of filling in until Kathy jumps in. I think the real question is, what do we do about this? How do we engage the values of the 18 to 23-year-old and millennial voters? That's one specific question.
That's what I was going to ask.
I will get to that, because we're going to get to what do we do about this.
Oh, great. Okay. That could answer most of these questions then. Why don't we continue with that part of it and then ads?
Okay.
So Mike, are you going to continue addressing this before we have more questions?
Address that one about millennials?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I think one is to understand, if you want to, you need to understand, I think, what are the values of the millennials? And again, what's important to them? And that's going to take a little bit of research. That's not something I'm totally up on. But again, they see the world differently. And it's just like trying to understand the point of view of the Republicans. What's the issue in the interest of the millennials? And how do we grab onto that? So it's really trying to understand what's the point of view of the other and being tolerant of that. Millennials do see the world very differently. But again, if I think about why, I think the millennials, at least some of the ones I've talked to, they're not very optimistic about the world. They see lots and lots of issues, but they don't see any progress.
So how do we reach them?
Well, I'm going to get to that, because if the Democrats and the Republicans can't come together, you're not going to reach the millennials. I think this election is real important, because I think, again, the millennials were very supportive of Obama. I don't think they came out to vote in large numbers for Trump because they didn't believe in Trump, and they didn't believe in Clinton. So the question is, what are Democrats going to do this time in terms of their platform to get them on board? They're very distrustful of government. They're very distrustful of the parties. A lot of talk and no action. But what I want to talk about is, how are the Republicans, Democrats going to fix this? You can't do it by yourself. No party can fix this by themselves.
So there's no hope.
Political system. No, there's lots of hope. There's lots of hope.
Is it through social media? Is that the best way to reach them?
Yes. Absolutely, because that's how they communicate is through social media, through texting and through Facebook, etc. So that's really the means that they use. The older generations tend to use more written press, but it's the social media because.
Yeah, why don't we let Mike continue here, because it sounds like he's going to answer some of these questions as we go along.
I'm going to answer some. Right. So individual sources, how do we do it? Here's the first one. If you want to create divisiveness and polarization, just understand the confirmation bias. We all do it. We all do it much of the time. When we have a particular idea or concept, when we believe it to be true, what we will do is we will look for evidence to support that point of view. It's motivated by wishful thinking. We tend to stop gathering information when the evidence confirms what we believe or our prejudices, the one that we would like to be true. And once we form that view, we will embrace the information that confirms it while ignoring and rejecting information that casts doubt upon it. This is really important because we do it all the time. So again, we really have to begin to understand how that works in our own lives, so that we can begin finding other information that would be disconfirming to our point of view and finding ways to integrate it. So even as you're dealing with the millennials, if you find beliefs and points of view of the millennials, you need to make sure you understand that that is a valid point of view, even though it might not be yours. These are other things that we tend to do in which create divisiveness and polarization. If I can convince you that I share your views and I care for you, you're going to become more open to being influenced by me. And again, this is, politicians can do that. Motivated reasoning. We arrive at conclusions that we want to arrive at. We remember information that fits our point of view. Again, people most informed politically are the most stubborn about it, the most educated. Evolution has left us with an immune system for uncomfortable thoughts. When our belief systems are attacked, we defend. We don't listen, we defend. People are unashamed of their prejudices, social norms that weaken. Yeah, it's okay now to not like blacks or not like immigrants, etc. Fear. I mean, this is what politicians can use, binary thinking, etc. So again, all of those things are what we as individuals use that maintain divisiveness and polarization. Now, can we heal, or are we doomed? We're doomed. Not going to happen. I'll spout simplistic opinions for hours on end, ridicule anybody who disagrees with me, and generally foster divisiveness, cynicism, and a lower level of public dialogue. And I think that could certainly be somebody that we're all aware of, who's on the national news every night. But again, that is sort of how Trump acts much of the time. This is one I say that I think is important, is regarding information, is be skeptical of the information you receive off the media, because the media is biased one way or another. There isn't any one source of media, social media or journalism, that is absolutely true to the fact. I mean, if you listen to CNN, clearly biased toward the progressive. If you listen to Fox News, clearly biased toward the conservatives. And I like Reagan's saying, trust but verify. You can trust to a degree media, but verify your facts. And again, that means you may have to use other sources other than, liberal, conservative, or liberal progressive sources. Brian Stevenson, who again wrote a book on the Equal Justice Initiative, again, this is important, and again, important. Change the narrative of your own specialness. We all think that we're special. We think that our particular group is special, be our Democrats or Republicans, whites, blacks, etc. We have to change. We are not all special. We're all pretty much in the same boat. Be willing to be uncomfortable. When you talk to people of different ideologies, different races, different generations, then be willing to be uncomfortable with their point of view. Be willing to listen. 3, if you want to understand other people, then you have to have contact with other people. And I think, as the data suggests, we're having less and less contact with other people. So again, if you want to understand millennials, if that's a specific group you want, then go out and talk to them and be willing to be uncomfortable with what they say about our generation and our political system, etc. And finally, I thought with Brian Stevenson, I love it, is hope that we can make this better. Because again, if you look historically, we've gotten into a bit of a bind these days. Solutions to political divisiveness. Again, these are just many ideas that could come up: reform the election process, close primaries, nonpartisan ballots, make redistricting less partisan. Again, I think Colorado did that because now we have an independent group that will look at that. Increasing voter turnout, mandatory voting, again, by mail. We do that in Colorado and in 5 states. But that, again, is now an issue of divisiveness in the country and no suppression. Again, campaign financing, et cetera. So there are probably some ways in which we can work on that. This is a few solutions to racial divisiveness, which still is alive and well. If you want to decrease prejudice, it really takes contact. This has been an old principle we've known since the 50s and 60s. But again, we have to find ways of living in the same neighborhood with other races, other people of color. And one of the things that is concerning when you do that is you get white flight. But again, there seems to be a number of 12 to 15% of minorities in a white neighborhood can decrease white flight. But the key is, if you want to begin to eliminate divisiveness and polarization, we have to find a way of being in contact with each other and in talking with each other. Another way is whites generally believe that they're not racist. When I ask whites, you think you're racist? Absolutely not. I love all blacks and people of color. Well, okay, I'm not going to argue about that. But there is another sort of racism, which is called institutional racism. And again, a guy, Ibram Kendi, wrote a book. He was on PBS the other night. And he said what we whites can do is learn to be anti-racist, which is we fight the structural and institutional racism that exists in this country at every level. And that is investigating and engaging in policy matters that maintain structural racism. Again, education, housing, the criminal system, et cetera. That's where whites, because we are the power, that's where whites can be pretty effective. Another one, I think, is become aware of what white privilege and implicit bias means. We whites are privileged. You know, it's not the same as growing up a person of color. And we all have implicit biases, not only whites, but blacks, Native Americans, doesn't matter. And that's, again, just in terms of how we see things. And again, be aware of those and how you might be practicing those and what your biases are. Join a RAG. This is a new thing called the Racial Affinity Group, which is whites beginning to sit around and learn about racism, etc. Racism also is not just about black. It includes all people of color, Hispanics, Latinx, Native Americans, and Asians, because when you look at the data, those groups also have difficulty. And racial divisiveness is happening in Durango. If you read sort of some of the summaries of the meetings with the Durango Community Relations Commission, there is a level of racism and bias, etc., in this country, in this city. So again, I'm not sure about education and housing. But finally, a solution: we need to come together, not to demonize each other, but to respect differences, etc. So again, that's really what it's all about. And let me say, in terms of political, this is really about, at some point, if we don't find ways of dealing with our political divisiveness and polarization, which is where policies need to come from, then we're not going to be in good shape. And again, if you want to attract the elderly, you want to attract the millennials, which I think Democrats need to do in this next election, to win the Senate and to win the presidency, then we're going to have to understand what's really important to those two groups and find a way to include those in the policies. But you know, I remember in when Clinton was elected president, and he came up with his healthcare bill, and I watched our Democratic representative just shoot the Democrats in the foot. I'm just not going to support that. So again, I think we have to find ways to really go across the aisle and work with the other party. It's just not going to work any other way. And we will remain divided and polarized. So I'll finish with it. We have met the enemy and he is us. I have met the enemy and he is me. I am the enemy potentially to this divisiveness and polarization. And there are some future things you can read if you want. Okay, I'm done.
Okay. That's great, Mike. Do we have any more questions, Kathy?
I think that Mike answered most of the questions that were put out there, but there was one comment that I thought would be interesting to hear from Mike, which is his opinion on the divisiveness within the Democratic Party itself, how he sees that.
Well, You know, I've decided I'm an independent, but I always vote Democrat because I believe in the values of the Democrats. I see the Democrats right now as divided because, again, you have the ultra liberals and you have the progressives, and then you have sort of probably the middle of the road people. And my concern is that if that divisiveness is not healed, if they don't have a common goal, which is not to elect Donald Trump again and to get our, Hickenlooper elected, I just see the Democrats shooting themselves in the foot. There's a difference between Republicans are really more ideologues, and Democrats, I can remember watching this and seeing this through history, Democrats are the party of special interests. You know, women, people of color, the poor, etc. So if the Democrats are going to prevail in this election, they have to find a common goal. And I think maybe they're doing it with Biden, again, doesn't have this great level of confidence of many people. But again, it's all about making sure that we don't get Trump in again. So again, Democrats got to do the same thing as Republicans. They're divided.
Okay.
My understanding back when we still had a whole bunch of Democratic candidates was that the millennials liked Joe Biden.
I didn't see that, but I would certainly look for the research. I think the millennials really liked Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders because, again, one of the things I read about the millennials is they want hope, and they don't see a lot of hope in the traditional Democratic Party and Biden. I mean, Biden, again, it doesn't have a real strong disapproval rating, but again, he doesn't have a real strong approval rating either. It's the same old, same old. I mean, I'm thinking of, what's her name? Alexandria.
AOC?
Yeah, she brings in a lot of hope. And again, a lot of millennials like her, and they like Bernie. But
So
again, we have. Go ahead, Gwen.
Well, we're running out of time here. I wanted to at least give Barbara McLaughlin a chance to make her announcement. I think this has been absolutely great, and obviously a lot of ideas about things that can be done. So if everybody will go back to mute, Barbara, if you'll unmute and make your announcement, we'd appreciate it.
I gotta put you back.
Hey, hello everybody. Michael, thank you. That was really, really interesting. And the only part I didn't like was that stuff about politicians that nobody likes, but I guess that's one of those things, isn't it? Hey, there's an initiative coming up. Oh, thank you. There's an initiative that we want to get on the ballot this time. If we don't put this on, we're going to have to borrow another couple of $2 billion for education next year, and there isn't any money left in our budget. It's called Initiative 271. It will lower taxes for everybody who makes less than $250,000, which as a teacher, this may be surprising, but I fall into that category. And then it will raise a tier level for everybody who earns more than that. So they will get the lower taxes for the first 250, and then it'll be a tiered up. It'll be about, I think it says about $2 billion raised every year. And $1 billion of that will go to education for teacher salaries and to keep teachers in the classroom. And the other $1 billion will go to helping everybody that's affected by the growth in Colorado. So that would be housing, healthcare, anything like that, transportation, anything that Colorado sees the need because of our growth. I have a petition. I did put my phone number and address in the chat. We have to have it done this week, unfortunately, because it's a really quick one. But we need to get 2,000 signatures from this Senate district. And every Senate district in Colorado has to have a certain percentage of signatures in. And I'm hoping that we can get it over the finish line. And then we can take a look at it more. And as it comes to the vote, just because you sign doesn't necessarily mean you have to vote on it. But if you look up fairtax.com, it has all the information on it. And I think it's a really good bill. And we need to start making streams of income for education because we're running out of money at the state. How's that?
Barbara, excuse me, did you just say you need to have this petition completed this week?
Yeah, there's a lot of petitions going around right now. But this one, we're trying to get it in. It doesn't have to actually be until August, but we want to make sure that we can get all the signatures checked in time. And I'm hoping that because I know everybody who signed my petition already, we're going to be okay on that. But yeah, it's kind of a quick turnaround here. We just got out of session so late that we haven't had time to really push it. So, surprise. And I think, Carol, you had asked if Olivia could come down to headquarters. We can't do that because it's my petition. There are several going around Durango, so if you can't contact me, there are other people doing it. But my phone number and address are in there, and you can drive by, and I'll have mask and gloves on and put a clipboard in your window. You can sign it and take off. You don't have to, no contact, okay?
Okay, thank you, Barbara.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. So basically in a few days, we'll have the recording available, and we will send something out to everybody and let you know that the recording is available, and we'll see what we can do on the on the slide deck. Since everybody had to sign up in order to get on here, we do have your email addresses, so we'll make sure that we get the information out to you. We're basically out of time. Again, I'd like to thank Matt and Mike both. I thought this was really good. And of course, next month, Barbara McLaughlin will be our main speaker, and Marsha Porter Norton will talk about her campaign. So we certainly hope to see you next month. I think it's the 4th.
August 3.
August 3.
Oh, you're
Okay.
right. You're right. It's the 4th.
4th. Okay. Well, we'll send out a lot of information, but make sure you sign up for that. So we appreciate everyone showing up, and hope you have a great day, and we'll see you next month. Thank you.